Hi everybody, this is Dr. Fitz, and I just wanted to give a brief introduction to the James Banks chapter that we're going to be reading for this week. Dr. Banks is from the University of Washington, and he is very well known in the field of multicultural education. He is a historian and focuses on the social studies, and he believes that multicultural education is crucial to help prepare young people and everyone to be able to participate, do their civic duty, and participate in an educated manner in our democracy. So he begins the chapter sort of describing multicultural education more as a perspective than really anything else. And he also discusses some of the historical roots of multicultural education, which really initially came out of the civil rights movement, and initially sort of spawned specific ethnic studies. But now multicultural education, ethnic studies certainly still exist as an aspect, but multicultural education comprises a lot more than that now. One of the things that he spends a good portion of this chapter discussing is how, given the diversity of the United States and how the United States was formed via conquering other people and immigration and things like that, that we do have a very culturally diverse society, and that's historically always been the case. So he discusses that at length and sort of takes that as a jumping off point for looking at multiculturalism, I guess you could say, through different lenses of race, class, gender, etc. He identifies, he groups sort of the macro cultural norms of the United States into four big ideas. You or somebody else might come up with a lot more specifics or might group them in different ways, but his thoughts on U.S. macrocultural norms include a focus on equality, that we have this norm that everybody is created equal and everybody should have equal opportunity in the United States, and that's sort of foundational to a lot of our documents that we have for governing our country. At the same time, another key aspect is individual opportunity, which sort of oftentimes is a little conflictual maybe with the first one, but this is the idea that everybody has the same chance, and therefore the cream rises to the top, and that everybody is personally responsible for their own success or failure, that people are rewarded for the merits of their work. And a lot of work in multicultural education has actually sort of unpacked some of those assumptions, and I think we will definitely be scrutinizing those assumptions as well. Another aspect of U.S. macroculture that he discusses is individualism versus groupism, and that sort of goes along with the idea of individual opportunity, that in the United States often, and this is not true for all cultural groups in the United States, but often the focus on the individual tends to be more emphasized than the good of the group, for example. And the last point he discusses is the cultural norm of manifest destiny, and that kind of goes along with the idea that the United States maybe should take care of other people's problems, or even within our own country, that the federal government and certain groups in the United States, particularly white people, should make decisions for other people, that we should have, quote, control over the natural environment or the physical environment, and the concept of materialism. So rather than saying, oh, these are definitely our cultural norms, I'm asking you guys to think about, to what extent do you feel like you were brought up with these norms and adhere or don't adhere to those norms? To what extent do you feel that any of these may be changing? So think about that as you read through this, and how this applies to you, or how you react to some of Dr. Banks's assertions with this. One other thing that I just wanted to bring up briefly is sort of nonverbal communication norms that we also have in the United States, and how these things can also vary across cultural groups within our country. And that could be things like how close we like to get with other people, how we use touch, how we use body language, things like that. So I just wanted to throw those in there as well. I thought that's interesting. So Dr. Banks discusses some of the different aspects of our culture that might influence our individual behaviors, our beliefs, our practices. And this is the notion of cultural hybridity, especially within a diverse setting like the United States. Many of us may adhere or learn about different norms within different communities of practice. So if I'm a white woman, I might have different beliefs or norms if I'm gay or straight, or if I grew up poor, or if I grew up wealthy. So those aspects of my life will mediate or influence how I view the world, and how I interpret my culture, and how I practice my culture. So that's just something to keep in mind with when we're talking, especially about other groups of people, that there's always as much diversity within a group as there is between groups. So not that we don't want to learn about and note differences, and it's good to learn about broad cultural practices, but it's also very crucial to always keep in mind how diverse one family or cultural group can be, and different individuals have different amounts within which they identify with aspects of their own cultural group. Then the bulk of the chapter, or actually not the bulk of the chapter, but after he sort of goes through like some of the different categories or aspects of culture that might influence us, then Banks goes into his theoretical framework of multicultural education. And I do find this quite useful. We could use this for analyzing our own practices at our classroom level or at the school level, if we're trying to become more inclusive of different viewpoints, different voices, etc. So he breaks it down in terms of content integration, knowledge construction, prejudice reduction, equity pedagogy, and empowering school culture. And just extremely briefly, content integration relates to when teachers actually include content about specific groups of people who might be left out of the curriculum otherwise. So if I'm a math teacher, I might purposefully go out and find mathematicians who are women or who are people of color, and find ways to include them in the curriculum, because oftentimes students view math and science as white men do that. So that relates to content integration. Knowledge construction is all about how knowledge is produced and whose point of view is represented. So if a historical event is presented in a text, we say often that history is written by the winners. Well, what about how do we get students to understand the points of view that are represented in a text? How do we get students to evaluate the truth value or the accuracy of what they're reading, find different sources for grounding their own opinions. And this is really central to Dr. Banks's notion that we're trying to raise critical thinkers and getting students to really analyze how knowledge is produced, and also then to be prepared to produce knowledge themselves. Prejudice reduction is just what it sounds like. That's a focus on reducing prejudice between different groups of people, and a lot of the times in the United States, historically, this is focused on reducing prejudice based on racial or ethnic affiliation. However, you could apply this to something else. And on my slide here, I just had this bullet about Kenneth Clark's doll experiment. If you've never checked out this video, A Girl Like Me, it's pretty interesting, and it just reiterates how in Kenneth Clark's experiment, he showed that he found that black children, little children, preferred to play with white dolls compared to dolls that weren't white. And the young lady who made A Girl Like Me video, she kind of explores body image and belief about skin color amongst young women. Obviously, it's her perspective. Anyway, it's a nice video. And then Jane Elliott is quite famous for doing the brown-eyed, blue-eyed experiment. That's what this is, a picture from The Eye of the Storm. And again, if you're unfamiliar with her, I'm not going to go into it right now, but you can check it out, or you can ask me and I can tell you all about it later. Okay. Equity pedagogy relates to finding different ways to include different learning styles in the classroom, different communication styles. On the slide about cultural norms, as saying that, you know, in some communities it might be expected for people to take turns and wait their turns, and in other communities, when you're having a dialogue, people want to participate more naturally than that. So equity pedagogy relates to learning about different learning styles, also learning about your students' background knowledge and bringing that in, learning about different ways to have dialogue with students, things like that. So that's more how we're teaching rather than the content that we're teaching. And the last category that he discusses is empowering school culture. And this is looking at the culture of the school. What is the culture of the school representing? Is it representing all the students or only some of the students? Who are the students who are getting disciplined the most? Or who are the parents who are members of the PTA? Things like that would be things that you would look at if you were looking at empowering school culture at your school level. So that's just a brief overview. He goes into each area a little bit more. And that's all I wanted to tell you about. The last slide that I have here, and he really doesn't discuss this in this chapter, but Banks also discusses how with all of those areas of dimensions of multicultural education, we can have different levels of implementation of those. And we might start out with, you know, a contributions approach where, you know, basically all that's going on in my school maybe is it's Black History Month, so we're going to do that for February. Whereas, you know, he's saying that that's okay to start there, but we want to look at, again, his goal of really getting students from different backgrounds, whether that's low SES or diverse ethnic background, whatever, involved in their own education, critically thinking, posing and solving problems, and that'd be the transformation and social action levels of multicultural education. And that's all I have about that. Here is what we're up to for this week. So you're just going to read the chapter, participate in our discussion forums. These are going to be small group discussions. And if you could please complete and upload your cultural awareness profile and begin to draft your initial reflections so that you have plenty of time to think about what you want to include. That paper should be between about 5 and 7 pages of content, so that says an include a title page. So, you know, if you tend to be long-winded, you might want to draft along and then cut it down a little bit. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for your time.